Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Dying Light. It came out a little while ago. I'm a little bit late on this video. There's a few reasons for that. One of the main reasons being that the review code landed like 12 hours before the game came out. So it went on my back burner, as many games like that do. I simply did not have the time to do anything more than the port report. I had other things to do, so I'm just getting around to it right now. But as we know, there are plenty of patient gamers around, especially on PC, so I'm sure this video will at least be of some use to them. So it is an open-world, parkour, zombie survival thingy. I don't know if calling it zombie survival is actually that reasonable, because I think zombie survival is developing into a genre of its own, and Dying Light does not fall into that. It's more of a first-person open-world action-adventure in which you will find zombies, which will be killed or possibly avoided. Simply the way of it. Survival, I think, implies more than this game really offers. It implies, perhaps, more in-depth systems focused on the act and the art of survival, as opposed to merely being a melee combat game or a first-person shooter, both of which this game actually is. So we could just call it that for the time being, I think. Now, the port report, we've gone over the options menu. I can report that since then, as we load into the campaign, which hopefully will load me into the right one rather than the multiplayer, good, is that the performance has significantly increased with a couple of patches. The downside to that is that they kind of cheated to get some of this performance. They actually reduced the overall max view distance, which means that on max, I think it's actually at more like 50% of the original. Now, this has resulted in a large gain in frames, and as I mentioned in the port report, really playing on minimum view distance is actually not that bad. There's really not that much that you're going to lose by doing that, so frankly, I don't really mind. However, it's still a bit of a cheap way of doing things as far as I'm concerned. It's a little bit of a cheat. I don't like it when game developers cheat and don't tell me. Try and slip things past us. No. Oh no, we noticed. So welcome to Dying Light. This is the tower, which is the hub world for most of what you're doing, frankly. Let's see if there's anything worth nicking here, and apparently there is not. What a shame. You will, within the tower, collect a bunch of quests, and you're pretty much safe from anything else as long as you're here. Once you leave it, well, you are open to the elements, and you will be dealing with all manner of things, including zombies, exploding zombies, bigger zombies with hammers, zombies in what appear to be environmental suits, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. I'm just going to skip ourselves through here. There we go. You know how it works. Now, it's a selection of different zombies which you can fight or avoid. Now, this might be sounding awfully familiar at the moment, and I'll try and skip this as well. If I can't, then just please don't pay attention, because this is probably spoilers, as is pretty much everything right now. This is sounding familiar, isn't it? Does this sound a little bit like Techland's previous Dead Island titles? It kind of does. Now, a lot of people have made the comparison. I think the comparison in some ways is apt, but in other ways is very reductionist. Some people said, oh, well, it's just Dead Island with a new skin and a parkour system, which is, frankly, not true. It definitely takes a lot of elements from Dead Island, including its melee system, and that's a good thing to borrow, because, frankly, the melee combat in those games was visceral. It also takes a strange amount of silliness from Dead Island. The idea of crafting these ridiculous, impractical, and frankly impossible weapons in order to kill zombies with out of little bits of string and knives and things that you find lying around the place. That's something that was a big core part of Dead Island and made it very Borderlands-esque in many ways. But in Dead Island, it felt a little bit more reasonable, I think. That was the thing that got me there. Dead Island was just absurd in many ways. And I think it was much easier to accept the idea of crafting these ridiculous weapons in a game that wasn't trying to be serious. Although every now and again they try it anyway. They try and make out like it's, oh god, it's horrible, everything's horrible, and we're trying to fight for our lives. In fact, there was a lot of really nasty stuff in Dead Island that really didn't feel like it was supposed to be there whatsoever. Dying Light has a lot more of that. It has a more serious vibe to it from the very start, and it does have its lighthearted moments, certainly, but they're not exactly common, and they feel a little bit contrived. You know, they often feature these kind of one-dimensional characters that have this strange quirk about them, and then they'll give you a quest that's ridiculous in some way, and you end up having to do that and rinse and repeat. There's very little humor with the main characters, and there's certainly not much at all with the actual protagonist, because he is I wouldn't call him a blank slate. I would go down the route of being a pair of trousers. He reminds me so much of the protagonist from Far Cry 4, whose name I can't even remember because he was that goddamn generic. That was a big problem with that game. The surrounding characters were kind of interesting, but the main character was, again, he was just a pair of trousers. I actually can't remember how to get off this roof. This was probably not the brightest idea. Yeah, I could just do that. There we go. That'll do the trick, and I should be able to get out this way, one way or the other. Crane is that, but he's actually a bit worse than AJ because he's just so damn obnoxious half the time. And it really breaks the mood. I recall running into a guy that told me of some pretty nasty stuff that had happened, and he was obviously very much in a state where it had affected him in a big way, and it was like, oh god, it's horrific. And then Crane just busts out, yeah, you must be real fun at parties. Like, what? Like, who acts this way? Like, which character says this? And then the conversation just ends. Like, Crane is a moron. That is abundantly clear, I think, from all of this. Just an absolute tithead is how I would describe him. He has seemingly no positive characteristics whatsoever, even though they try and force that upon him. I don't even know where I'm going. I'm just going to throw myself to my death. It's probably just easier that way. There we go. Now it's actually respawned me in a place where I can get where I'm supposed to go. It's fine. We were just talking about Crane anyway, so it's not like running around wasn't too bad a thing to be doing. He is dull. And honestly, quite a lot of the characters are, but it benefits from having a fairly diverse cast of voice actors with all sorts of different accents and particular eccentricities. So even while the writing is passable at best, I mean, it's never been Techland's specialty, although they've managed to pull it off in some of the Call of Juarez titles, but Dead Island's writing was fairly dire. They're still reasonably interesting because they're from all sorts of different places, and the contrivance that they came up with for it, which was really quite smart, was that the Olympics was going on in this city. And as a result, when everything went down, a bunch of people from different places in the world were trapped here, so you encounter people of all nationalities. So that keeps the cast fresh, which is probably for the best, because if you focus too long on one of the cast members, you're probably going to see just how one-dimensional they really are. They're not terrible, but they're not particularly well put together, I've got to say. There's no particular character that I really like. And even Jade, who is obviously a very strong character and has a good motivation to hate you at the start of the game, frankly, and, you know, performs various acts of heroism and is very clearly a linchpin of the whole tower operation. She's still not that interesting. She's just got a very dour mood on most of the time. She's very practical, which is fine. You can have a character like that, but frankly, that's how a lot of the characters operate. So there's not really much to say there. Occasionally you'll run into someone who's silly, but they feel like they've just been put in to make the game look a bit more interesting. It's like, hey, look at this guy. He's a bit strange and wacky, isn't he? It's like, well, yes, but that doesn't make him interesting necessarily. It just means that you shoehorned him in there for a cheap laugh. Alright, he's got a special deal for me. Let's have a look and see what he's got here. All right. Yes, there are some fun accents in the game, needless to say. So, shopping. Plenty of that. You'll notice that my inventory is chock full of absolute junk. Look at that. I got all sorts of things. I got modified weapons and all sorts of nonsense like that. Let's have a look at our inventory. So, the crafting system in the game is reasonably simple to use. You just get the parts that you need, but a lot of them can be used with multiple parts, so I can make a pocket lighter either out of a short knife or a long knife. It doesn't really matter as long as I then have the components, and I can build an exorcist out of almost all of these things. And these are modified weapons, so this adds bleeding and electricity. On top of the weapon crafting modification system, you also have the ability to add items to the weapon, and that will buff it up even more. So if I have a look at my crude pick, for instance, and go to upgrade on F6, you notice I have two mods here, the King and the Templar, which have upgraded handling, durability, and damage. So this is a pretty beastly weapon, but they break. and they permanently break. You can fix them for a while. This one will tolerate 5 more repairs and has fairly high durability, so I'm going to be using this for a little while, but once they break, they are useless, and you might as well just sell what's left of them or dismantle them. So you don't get too attached to a weapon, and actually I kind of think that's a good thing, because it forces you to keep looking. And I think I'm just going to have a bit of a rest here, actually. There we go. It forces you to keep looking, and it forces you to use what's around you more often than not. And I can appreciate that. Although, outside of early on in the game, I think it's very easy to build up a rather large stash of decent enough weapons, so you won't have to grab the nearest piece of fence or whatever that's lying by and try and do that. I actually found the early game to be quite compelling. A lot of people found it difficult, and I think that's the best thing about it, because you're scrambling, you're scavenging in the early game. You're trying to find as many things as you can. You're trying to find a good weapon or craft something that will allow you to actually effectively fight, rather than take 10 swings to kill a zombie. And that bit of the game I actually found to be really fun. Some people found it frustrating. I found it really enjoyable because it really had that survival element to it, and I was very much using my limited parkour skills to try and avoid as many zombies as possible. For some reason out here, we do have some frame rate drops. Not too many. I mean, most of the time, the game runs fairly well, as I said before, but you do enter areas from time to time where things do get a little bit gnarly. So if we head over to the options menu, we can knock down the view distance a little bit, and that should give us our frames back. Because I just like the video to stay at 60 if possible. There we go. That will do the job. No problem at all. And then we can just whack our way through here. So the early game is pretty interesting, and most of the time the early game you're going to want to avoid the night as well, and that's an element that I haven't discussed yet, and it's really one of the things that differentiates it from Dead Island. Yes, the melee combat is quite similar, but the nighttime is almost like an entirely different game, because there are these big hunters that will try and find you, and they are nasty beasties. They are pretty damn hard to kill. They stalk you. The game actually becomes something of a stealth game, but there's a reward for going out at night, because you'll more often than not find that supply drops come down. Interesting. Okay, something going on here. Get off him. There you go. We can deal with him. Thank you very much. But it becomes something of a stealth game, and you'll be avoiding and using your parkour skills, and also using traps that you've set up during the day, such as light traps and fence traps and all sorts of things like that. I like that a great deal, and early on I avoided the night, but once I got a few skills, I started going out there, because you get double experience at night. So there's a real incentive to go out, and also you can set it up so that a hunter, which is an actual player, can join your game, and it will start this little kind of skill challenge where it will ask you to blow up some volatile nests, and the hunter will try and kill you in the process. And that's a whole different ball game, because the hunter has a set of abilities of his own that he can level up, and you'll be using your UV light and also trying to trap him in various places and kill him, and you get rewards if you beat him as well. So it's a nice little element. You've noticed that since Dark Souls, a few other games have been trying to do this. Watch Dogs tried to do it as well. I think it was actually one of Watch Dogs' strongest features. I really liked the way that they did the multiplayer metagame in that. That was actually a great deal of fun. I absolutely adored it. And the hunter mode in this is pretty cool. I played a little bit of the hunter. He's got a lot of mobility. He's got a decent variety of abilities that he can use. But I did find that it's almost impossible to get kills if you're up against a group of people in a co-op game that stick together. You just won't. You die in like 3 hits from a good weapon, and if someone gets a UV light on you, it drains your energy, so you lose all your mobility, and then you're just a sitting duck. So unless you can somehow divide and conquer, then things can get pretty damn difficult. And as far as I know, during the hunter mode, they have unlimited durability on their weapons, and it doesn't spawn the nasty creatures, the ones that are really, really dangerous. You're just dealing with viral zombies who are dangerous, but nowhere near as dangerous as the guys that can only be warded off by UV and very heavy firepower. So I would say there are problems with that. And I think that those that are doing really well are either taking out people in the single-player mode, or they've like leveled their zombie up to be able to do all sorts of good things with them. But it's a nice addition, and the co-op mode works really well. Admittedly, everyone plays as Crane, so it's a little bit weird, but the co-op is totally functional. Now, speaking of co-op, Dead Island had it, but in this case, they decided to focus on one character. And I think that the game benefits somewhat from that, because they have gone really in-depth with the skill system in this game. I think this is one of the game's strongest features, because a lot of these skill trees are not only very diverse, but they're also pretty damn fun. A lot of the stuff that you can unlock, even at the lower levels, is very interesting. And you get some utilitarian stuff like extra slots. I mean, this is a quality of life improvement, and it's great that it gives you it early on because it's very frustrating otherwise. But then, early on, you can unlock elemental throwing stars, for instance. You can improve your ability to repair stuff. If you go to combat, there's all sorts of fun things here. You learn a passive stun, you learn a kick stun, you learn a drop kick, a power attack, which gradually is kind of increasing your combat abilities. And you can do some pretty fun stuff. You can learn how to craft elemental grenades. And later on in the game, you can unlock the ability to craft a grappling hook, which gives you all sorts of mobility options. So all three of these skill trees are really good, and the game feels a lot better as you unlock each skill. Everything feels like it's made a huge difference to your game. Borderlands could learn a lot from this, frankly, which, in my opinion, is a game that has one of the worst skill systems, because they're all very generic. They all reminded me of vanilla WoW stuff. Whereas in this, I mean, look at all this stuff. Everything here matters. Everything. Even something boring like light drop. It reduces your fall damage by half. That's a huge deal. That completely changes the way that you decide to parkour now, because you don't die anywhere near as easily. And it just gets better. It really does. It just gets better the further you go in. It's a really well-designed skill system. I'm very impressed by it, and I think that the game would have probably suffered if they put multiple characters with multiple skill trees in, because they would have either had to repeat stuff or they'd run out of good ideas. I like the fact that there's 3 different ones, and they kind of level up in the same way that the Elder Scrolls games do. They just level up as you go. So the more good jumps you do, the more agility you'll gain. Quests mostly feed into the survivor rank, but power level is just done by getting kills and fighting and all that kind of stuff. It's well done. It's a nice little system. Ben Franklin's key. Add electricity to any melee weapon. I would love to get that. We have learned to craft a Ben Franklin's key. We also got an upgrade, I think, called a Juggernaut. So I might be able to do something with that. That would be fun. Can I just keep adding stuff to this particular melee weapon? I think my melee weapon actually already has electricity, so I imagine probably not. I'd like to add fire to my weapon. Let's see if I can do that. No, I don't believe it's going to let me do it, because my other stuff's already being crafted. So I could add fire to my garden sickle, however. There we go. Cool. So I modified that. Let's make Ben Franklin's key as well. Yeah, so you can't add multiple stuff. But if you want to do stuff like that, you want to get one of the rare combination upgrades, which will actually give you multiple things. But now I have a sickle. That's fun. All right, seems like there's a challenge here. Let's see if we can do that. This is one of the other weird things that this game's got going on, because it can't avoid falling into the contrivances that tend to plague most open-world games. And I say plague perhaps in an unfair fashion, because a lot of people really like the side activities. And this game's got a lot of it, but they don't really make sense if you take this game seriously as a survival game. It's really not. It's pretending to be, but it really isn't. It's an open world concrete jungle, you know? It's an urban playground. And that's not a bad thing. I don't think that when you buy into a game like this, that you're necessarily looking for a crazy, realistic survival experience. Are you? Maybe some of you are, but this game is not that. Just understand that. This game is, in many ways, very, very silly. And even though it's pretending to be a little less silly, I'm gonna fail this. This is terrible. It's pretending to be a little bit less silly than Dead Island, but it's not. It is not less silly than Dead Island. It is just as silly. It's just wearing a different hat. And you know what? That's okay. Because open world mayhem and distractions are what a lot of people want from games like this. And what I will say is that this game's lack of fast travel is actually kind of great, because it forces you to learn routes and parkour your way around the city. And parkouring your way around the city is damn satisfying, because they've created a really fun, compelling city to run around. Like I said, it's an urban playground. It's set in a slum. There's all sorts of things to parkour on and off. And for the most part, traveling around the city is sublime and enjoyable. It's going to teleport me right back here, isn't it? This is, I mean, come on, that's just weird that they do that, isn't it? I know why they're doing it, because hey, it's a a side quest. It's a challenge, but it's so damn gamey. They don't even make an effort to actually disguise that. But hey, I'm a mechanics guy. I can suspend disbelief in favor of fun mechanics and activities. And I intend to continue to do that, whether you like it or not. Thank you very much. Is that the most efficient way up there? It probably isn't, but... yeah, we'll give it a bash anyway. So, you know, I'm not going to complain too much about that. Some people will. Some people are going to cry about suspension of disbelief. And that's fine. Ludonarrative disco biscuits. All that kind of stuff. Yeah, I get it. That's fair. But I don't care, personally. I'm not particularly bothered by it. A lot of the side activities are pretty fun as well. They have these GTA-style weapon rampages where they just give you a gun and ask you to just blow up a bunch of stuff, which is a great way to farm absolutely infinite items, by the way, because even if you fail the challenge, they drop all the items on the ground as packs, so you can just grab the packs when you come back and just farm a bunch of items and money, which is fairly handy, I'm gonna say. Outside of that, you're dealing with side quests. Some of the stuff dynamically spawns, such as airdrops, which you can try and get. You've got to get there pretty quickly because NPCs will try and steal them. And, hey! Did we make it? We did. Oh, there we go. And if you get them, you'll get items that you can hand in and you'll get rewards for that. If you don't, well, you don't. And I like that. It's cool because a lot of games are kind of afraid of not showing you all the content. It's like, oh, we can't let you miss it. It's like, yes, you can. You can let you miss it, you know. And I'm going to grab this one. There we go. This is actually very useful for nighttime. You can allow a player to miss content. You can make them feel like they're being punished for not being fast enough. And also, you've got to kind of force a player to prioritize certain things. And I think that the airdrop system is a really cool way of... oh, that's not a nasty thing at all, is it? Let's hit it with the thing. There we go. It's gone. I think it's a pretty cool way of doing things. I'd like to see more games just have those kind of dynamic events. Reminds me a little bit of Red Dead Redemption, where you just come across things. And that's the joy of exploring. And it works well, because, as I said, this game doesn't have fast travel, so you're gonna explore whether you like it or not. And buildings are chock full of things for you to scavenge. You'll find rare items and epic items in things like locked chests and things like that. And you are encouraged to look for them. And you're also encouraged just to pick the city clean, really. And you'll have to venture further and further out in order to find items, which will generally be better and better as you go. And it will take some time, but it's gratifying when you find it. So having things that you just stumble upon, I think, is key to a game like this. And it does have some of that. You've got some little survivor challenges every once in a while where you... ooh, looks like there's one right now, actually. Where you'll try and save somebody from a bunch of zombies. And you'll just kind of come across it, and they'll give you a reward for doing so. That's fine. No, I would actually like them to be a few more dynamic challenges and maybe a few less of the silly side quests, frankly. Just, I'd like to see maybe some kind of warfare between the rival gangs in the city and the factions. That never really happens, although you do occasionally rescue innocents from the other faction, which is fine. I think that that's maybe the best way to do open world games that are very focused on exploration. Far Cry did a little bit of that. Perhaps a little bit too much. But it also littered the place with activities as well. Will you ever get away from putting activities in an open world game? Not of this particular type, I don't think. I think it's almost expected at this point. But it's not like Dying Light does it badly. That's the thing, like, there's not that many terrible things about this game, but simultaneously, this game doesn't have an original bone in its damn body, frankly. And even the nighttime stuff is borrowed from other games. The melee system is, of course, taken pretty much directly from Dead Island, which was their previous game. And the crafting system is there as well, and they could have really improved it. I mean, particularly, let's say I want to make some lockpicks. Guess what? I've got to click every bloody time, and then I've got to click confirm. Come on, really? I've got 25 lockpicks to go. I mean, you could let me craft multiple things at once. Maybe that's an unlock, but frankly, it shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be. Absolutely not. So there are certainly things to criticize there. I do not think it's a particularly original game. I think it's very much cobbled together from previous titles. It takes a lot of ideas from various places, but it puts them together well. It's the idea of a recipe. Yes, okay, it uses fairly generic ingredients, but it's the way that you prepare, combine, and then cook the dish that really makes it unique in its own way. And Dying Light cooks things together quite nicely. I'd certainly say it's a better game than Dead Island is. It's better put together. It has a really nice movement system, as I said. The parkour is well implemented. It's actually one of the best first-person parkour systems I've seen. And I would take it certainly over Assassin's Creed system because it's intuitive, and yet simultaneously, it requires at least a degree of player choice. Whereas, let's be honest, Assassin's Creed's parkour, outside of the kind of puzzle climbing elements that's going on with it, is just hold down the button and you can climb up pretty much anything. That's not the case with Dying Light. And yet, simultaneously, they manage to keep things nice and fluid, which is surprising. Because there's a big risk, I think, of things getting very, very janky if you take away some of the help that would be provided in a movement system like this, the sort of automated help, and then replace it with actual required player input. Yeah, I could see that being a problem. Yet Dying Light somehow manages to avoid that, which is really quite impressive. And I've had a whale of a time with the parkour. I really do genuinely think it's a good system, and it's really, really well implemented. And I wouldn't necessarily have expected that from Techland, who have, with Dead Island in particular, created games which are kind of fun, but also janky in many ways. You know, they don't feel polished. Dying Light feels surprisingly polished in pretty much every way. I mean, not only does it look pretty good, you've got to admit, it's got some very impressive lighting effects, some fun physics, some nice environments. It's a bit brown. I mean, it's very brown. Let's just be fair. It's very brown. But is that really the worst thing, especially considering where it's meant to be? It actually looks a little bit washed out in many ways. But I think that particularly with the lighting, the aesthetic actually ends up looking a little bit more unique than I would have otherwise expected. There was a definite risk of things looking very generic, I think. But, you know, it's not a bad looker. Reasonable texture quality across the board. Good lighting effects. And I say performance is, for the most part, pretty much fine. Although you might have to twiddle with a few things, particularly with the view distance, sorry. There's also the occasional frame drop. It's not particularly annoying, but it does happen every once in a while, so I'm not really sure exactly what's causing that. But outside of that, my port report is, for the most part, pretty much accurate. I don't believe they've really fixed much else, to be honest. So what would I say about it? Well, I mean, you're going to be dealing with an open-world game that has fairly forgettable story, some fairly forgettable characters, but the actual open world itself and the mechanics and the fighting system and the hunter-gathering aspects and some of the side activities, and especially at night, the game's it's a laugh. It's a riot, especially if you can get in there with friends. It's, I suppose, what you would expect from an open world game, which is in a way kind of a shame. You know, maybe it would be nice. Oh, I don't have any bullets for that. That's not going to help me. Okay. It would be nice, perhaps, if the game had innovated in any sort of meaningful sense, but it really hasn't. It kind of played it safe in many ways. It's gone back to zombies again, which, of course, a lot of people are absolutely sick of, but it is still a very competent title. And if you are looking for a AAA open world that has co-op and has a good amount of content along with it, I mean, the game is stuffed with things to do and it has a giant map, then I think that you're not going to be disappointed with Dying Light. You're probably not going to be hugely impressed by it. It's good. It's not great. It's not Game of the Year material, top 10 of the year material. And I'm making, obviously, a giant assumption, considering it's just February right now, but really, another dead end. If you just want a game that works, a game that does exactly what it says on the tin and does what it does pretty damn well, then that's what Dying Light is. Techland seems to be evolving as a developer. I'm looking forward to Hellraid, of course, from them, which is looking kind of ridiculous. They've certainly made good games in the past. I think that Dying Light is probably their, outside of Call of Juarez Gunslinger, is probably their best game to date. And if you're not sick of zombies and you're not sick of open world, there's certainly a lot. There are far worse games that you could buy than Dying Light, frankly. Only what I could say about it. I have had a decent amount of time with the 12 hours or so that I've put in so far. I haven't felt particularly bored at any real point, although you certainly do have to end up backtracking quite a lot due to the lack of a fast travel system. But simultaneously, that's also kind of the joy of it, because every time you go out of the tower and start to jump along the rooftops, you feel a certain thrill, a certain rush. Have some fire. Hopefully you enjoy that. It turns out you did not. Let's drop kick you in the face. And let's be honest, drop kicking zombies into spike traps actually doesn't get old. I have attempted to see whether or not it does not. It actually does, and as it turns out, it does not. So, hey, there you go. That's my scientific analysis. Drop kicking zombies never actually gets old at any point. Drop kicking humans, on the other hand, that can get a little bit dull, but hey. Ooh, an axe. Fun times. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't show you the nighttime, because as I mentioned earlier, the nighttime is almost, I wouldn't say it's a completely different game, but it's definitely got a very different feel to it, and I think that, frankly, we should have a look at it, because if we don't, then this would be a pretty crappy video. So, at night, the zombies are a little bit stronger, not too much, you can still fight them, and frankly, it's kind of worth doing so, because, as I mentioned, you will get double experience on both action and agility skills. So, if you do a lot of parkour, and if you do a bunch of fighting, you will benefit, and you'll gain a bunch of points to level up quite easily. But it's a little bit wilder, because you're going to be dealing with a lot more volatiles, you're going to be dealing with a lot more virals, and you're going to be dealing with the absolutely horribly unpleasant beasties that require you to use UV light in order to escape them. In fact, as you can notice here, I'm looking backwards as I'm being chased by horrible individuals. I was able to look backwards and actually toss a Molotov, which has got some of them off my tail, but right now, I'm being chased, and it's not nice! It really is not. Oh, ah! And I'm probably going to die. Indeed, I do. If I was a little bit less wild about it, I probably would have done a better job of dealing with that. But you will notice on the minimap the larger stalkery kind of creatures, and you will be able to avoid their vision in general. Don't make too much noise. That's a good way to get yourself killed at night. But fun things happen at night, and as I said, there is a reason to be out at night as well. Plus, of course, you have things like traps that you can play with, like this light trap, which is going to put UV light on everything, which is not massively useful at the moment, because we're not actually dealing with the big creatures like this guy. But if he comes in... spikes everywhere. But if he happens to come in your general direction, you can activate a trap that you've set up, and then things will get a great deal more interesting. Speaking of UV, we'll probably want to do that. I'm being chased by one right now, so I could actually look backwards and use my UV to try and get away from him. But it can become really tense. If you get a lot of these damn things on your tail, then it can get pretty wild. I'll put some UV on in there just to scare him off. It won't kill him, but it will scare him off for the time being. So using the safe zones and also using your knowledge of the area to try and find the nearest place that you can go to that will actually be safe is particularly fun. I think it's a nice little challenge. I fail it frequently, but there are rewards for not failing it, as you will see. I'm gaining quite a lot of experience as I try and escape these guys, and I should be able to hopefully just get into that safe zone, which will allow me to escape the bastards without too much of a problem. But first, raid the fridge. Yes, there we go. I will have this halva and these household supplies, and I will hope that they don't know where I am. And thankfully they don't. It's a nice little addition. And it gets better the more that you play it as well, because you'll be able to unlock different kinds of trap, and you'll be able to set things up, and it's really quite enjoyable. A lot of the traps are kind of preset. The light traps are in the same places. You sometimes have to reset them in order to make them work again, and there are certain quests to activate some as well. But outside of that, it's a fairly fun time. It's a much more tense situation than the daytime, which is really fairly easy to do. Not really too much to worry about in the daytime. Everything's reasonable. I mean, you can... It's not that you can't get killed at daytime. You can, especially if you take on groups of thugs, but more often than not, you're simply dealing with zombies that are reasonably easy to get rid of. Now, I'm going to have a word with him, because I have a feeling that he has a weapon side quest for me, so we'll do that just as kind of wrap-up of the video. The addition of the nighttime mode is probably one of the only things that sets this game apart from others, and it's nice that the night cycle is not just cosmetic in this game. It has genuine effects, it has mechanical consequences, but they still incentivize you doing it anyway. That's not available at night. That's sad. Hopefully there's a bed in here so I can go back to daytime and we can maybe do the little quest. Is that a bed? I guess that counts. And I can claim survivor points for surviving the night as well. just by doing a bunch of stuff at night here as well. It's cool that they incentivize that, rather than just making it a random challenge for people that would say, oh, well, I'm not playing the game optimally on purpose just to make sure that I have a bit more fun with it. No, there's a good reason for doing it, even though they will warn you against it, of course, a great deal of time, but still, that doesn't mean that it's not worth the effort. Come on, you're going to die eventually, aren't you? There you go. That's what we like to see. Oh, it's actually requiring headshots. All right, let's try and suck a little bit less then. Get off. Thank you very much. Yeah. It's a fun little addition. Dying Light, ladies and gentlemen. It's available for $60 or your regional equivalent on Steam. And, of course, it's on the next-gen consoles, although I wouldn't recommend it because it runs at 30 frames per second, and who the hell wants to play games like that, right? My name's been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.